All right, welcome back, everybody. This week's episode, we're breaking down the run mechanics and teaching longevity in running. So, whether you're trying to improve your own running mechanics or you're looking to help somebody else improve their running mechanics, tonight we're going to do a 10-point assessment that you can check those mechanics with. And then we're also going to show you guys some videos at the end so you can film yourself, film your buddy, and so you know what to look for. So that way we can improve that longevity. I'm joined tonight with both Coach Andy, Coach Jimmy, who I know have some great things to add into this episode as well. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. So, like I said, we have a 10-point assessment. The first thing we're going to look for when we want to break down somebody's form is just overall movement pattern. We've all seen those individuals who you look at run and you just think like, damn, they move well. They move like a gazelle. So whether it's you're looking at Usain Bolt on a track, whether you're looking at a stud receiver who just seems like they are moving effortlessly, we just want to sit there and observe how they move overall. On the flip side of it, I'm sure we've all looked at an individual and thought like, that looks pretty painful. Like that has to hurt. So we want to go ahead and just get that overall observation to start, because then when we get into the videos, we kind of already have an idea of what we want to look for in that individual. First thing, overall movement pattern is going to be huge for helping us move forward. The next thing we're going to look at is overall symmetry. So when we talk about symmetry, we're obviously looking at the balance of the body. And when we're looking at somebody's running pattern here, a lot of past injuries are going to pop up here. And you'll see a lot of these small injuries. You know, the person who taught me this checklist, she's absolutely phenomenal looking at the symmetry, because she'll sit there and see somebody running and she'll look and say, oh, they have a shoulder injury. And you look and then you see that person kind of nursing, not getting the proper arm swing, maybe on their left side, while their right arm has that swing. So we want to make sure the body stays as symmetrical as we can. There's always going to be those previous injuries that create some of those imbalances, but we want to even those out as much as possible. So left and right side staying even with it. So first two, we're looking pretty much just observing the body to see what we can find there. So we have overall movement pattern, overall symmetry, and now let's start to break down the actual body parts of it. So if we look at the first body part, we're going to look at what are our eyes doing? Where's our head tilt at? So one of the things, and guys, I'm sure you've done this before with coaching your athletes, is where are you telling them to look? You're always telling them to be looking forward, hey, eyes looking where we're moving. When we first started teaching this run clinic, this run breakdown, we were out in El Paso. So it was very easy to teach like, hey, look at the mountain line. If you don't see the mountain line, that you're probably looking in the wrong spot. Unfortunately, if I can speak here, we see a lot of individuals, maybe as they fatigue, they start to look down. So if we're rucking, we're running, we're looking down, seeing our feet, our eyes are not going to be in the right spot. So very simple. A cue I use all the time in my warm-up drills is eyes looking where we're moving. And that gets those eyes forward. Or I've heard people say head up, because that will also get them in that right position. And it corrects a lot of other things that you'll see in this 10-point assessment here. Next one, we're going to move down the body. We're going to look at the shoulders. And what I've seen through my coaching career is when I try to coach so much about maybe some of the smaller parts of the body, I get athletes thinking too much. So a lot of times, some of these smaller ones, I'll try to take the thinking out. So it's not them thinking 15 different things. A cue I like to use all the time in coaching is anybody who plays golf knows if you start thinking about multiple different things, you're bound to start slicing, start hooking the ball. So the fewer things we can think about, the better. So this next one, we look at the shoulders. I'm not teaching too much on the shoulders. I want people to naturally relax and let those shoulders move. And what we'll see with the shoulder and then the arm drive, which I'm going to discuss on this next point, is that should be naturally facilitated by that knee drive. So if you look at our daily life, we're going to naturally move those arms, those shoulders based off what that knee is doing. So if I'm walking, I step with my left foot, my right arm is still swinging forward. Once I step with my left, or once I step with my right foot, my left arm is swinging forward. And it's the exact same thing as a jog, as a run. The only difference is the knee drive that is facilitated there that should naturally facilitate my arm swing. So I don't overly coach individuals saying, hey, do this with your arms. You have to be here. You have to be here. Because then I get individuals thinking about it. They start to tighten up those shoulders, which is the last thing I want. I mentioned earlier about looking at individuals when they run and you think like, damn, that person moves well. We have to stay relaxed. So if I get somebody already tense in their shoulders, that's going to have them tense up throughout the rest of the body. So shoulders, relax, naturally move. That arm swing should be naturally moving with that knee drive and with those hips as well. So our fifth one we're going to check down is going to be the arm swing with it. And a lot of times I'll talk about this with the shoulders, like I just said. But that arm swing is going to be so vital because, like I said, that knee drive facilitates that arm swing. And then the better arm swing we have is also going to help that knee drive, right? So with this, like, again, we want to be nice and relaxed with it. One of the big things I've seen coaches do before is they'll sit there and teach athletes to sit there and hold potato chips. So we don't want to sit there and being clenched up in those fists, those arms. So they'll sit there and put that potato chip in between that middle finger and that thumb to get them nice and relaxed, keep those arms nice and relaxed as well. And so the other big thing we see with the arm swing is, I'm sure you guys have seen it, it's very common with individuals who have rucked a lot, is you guys seen the runners who their arms are down by their hips. So we want to avoid that. So we think about, where our arms should be. Think about like a dumbbell curl. So if I'm curling a dumbbell, what's the easiest part of the dumbbell? Is it the bottom part or is it when I'm up here closer to my shoulder? So it's closer up there by the shoulder, right? So I want to get that natural, or not necessarily natural. I want to have that flexion in there at that elbow. So I'm not overly extended. What we do see all the time is guys who've ran with rucks, that ruck gets their hands down there below. So they get that arm nice and long, but we want to try and teach getting those hands up, keeping that nice flexion in the elbow. Still, I don't want to overly coach this one, like I said, on the shoulders. But we do want to make sure that we are putting ourselves in those best positions there. So once we look at the shoulders, the arm swing, the next thing we're going to look at, and sorry, real quick before I move on. Jimmy, is that you with your hand raised?
Yep. Yeah. So I just want to touch on that because I think it's a good point as far as the arm action, because the way I would coach athletes, if they weren't using their arms and almost running with their arms at the sides, if you were trying to do a box jump or just jump as high as possible without your arms, there's going to be a significant difference in how high you jump. Well, the same thing is with sprinting. Try sprinting with your arms at your sides. You're not going to be very fast. Obviously, we're talking more about like mid distance to long distance, but still the same concept. Like you have to have that good arm action. It was amazing to me in college, like how often kids would just not get like that. It should be opposite arm, opposite leg when you run, because all these things are important because you want to like evaluate when you're healthy. So then also on the back end, if you do have an injury, you can then look back like, hey, this was my norm. And then now I have X, Y, and Z injury. If it's a shoulder injury, yeah, we're going to be looking at the upper body. If it was a lower body injury, we're going to be looking at the lower body. So this checklist is really helpful because it may not mean much to you now when you're healthy, but capture that, even if you just videotape it and you're not exactly sure what you're looking for. But then unfortunately, injuries happen. And let's say you have to take a break from training. Well, look at that previous video and then film yourself again to see, follow that checklist. Well, I'm a little off in my upper body or I'm a little off in my lower body. I may need to do some training interventions to get me back on track. So that was the only thing I just want to chime in as you kind of kept going. So.
No, yeah, absolutely. And then, I said early on, we're going to show some videos on what to look for. Having those before after videos is vital. It was funny because we're going to show a couple videos of me running today. I had asked somebody else who I knew previously had a hip drop, and one of the times I've filmed him before, I had asked him to come over today so I could film and really kind of show that hip drop. And we'll get to hip drop in a second on this checklist. But then as I was trying to film him in the location, he'd fixed the hip drop. So good for him. I really wanted as an example in the video today, though. So, but it's like, that's good for him to have seen that progress with it. So, all right, moving on from the shoulders and the arms. Next, we're going to look at the core. Again, this is one I'm not going to overly coach. But when I look at the core, we want to make sure it's engaged. We're not doing a Valsalva maneuver like I'm on a squat, but we want to make sure it's not loosey goosey in there. And so another way we can look at it is that rib cage. So I'm engaging that core enough that my ribs are down, the same way that I would coach a band pull apart. I don't want those ribs expanding. And now we're hyperextending that low back. Core is nice engaged, ribs are nice and down with it. And that's all I'm going to say truly on that core in that run part. Jimmy, you got your hand up again? Oh, my bad. Next one we're going to look at, and the next few are huge. And a lot of the upper body, I think it's overlooked a lot in the running, but it is truly going to make us more efficient. But here's where we'll really start to see a lot of these injuries come in. So next one we're going to look at is, what are our hips doing? And there's so many different ways to look at this. So the first cue I want to bring up here is, think about, you have a sack of marbles at your waistband. So we have, what is it? A fanny pack. So if I had a fanny pack around my waist, I had the zipper open, I had a sack of marbles in there. I want my hips neutral, that those marbles are not falling out of that fanny pack. So what I talk about when I mean hips neutral, we talk about a posterior pelvic tilt, a anterior pelvic tilt, all would have those marbles fall out. Or one, so we do see that quite frequently in running. We know when we see with that pelvic tilt, a lot of times that can put a lot of strain on those upper hamstrings that are attached at those hips. So they're staying lengthened or not neutral. Another one we see so often, and I just referenced it a second ago, is that hip drop. And so now if I'm planting, my left hip hikes, my right hip drops. If we look back to that sack of marbles, that's going to get those marbles falling out of that fanny pack. So we really want to keep those hips as neutral as we possibly can. And that is one that we see so often. And there's so many drills that we can do to work on those. I'm gonna let you guys hop in right there. I see a hand raised.
Yeah, I was gonna you led right into it. Uh, what are your strategies for somebody who's just naturally in anterior pelvic tilt? Somebody, the sprinter type, the people who are naturally good at sprinting, they're often in anterior pelvic tilt. But what if you have somebody who they just straight up they can't get posterior tilted?
So if I have somebody working on the pelvic tilt, so one of the ones I always really liked is, um, there was a couple ways. Have you guys ever worked in any of these drills where you hold the PVC pipe? So you'll get the biceps by the ear, you'll hold the PVC pipe. That should naturally get us into that position. So now maybe we're going over hurdles, maybe we're performing something like an A skip, a B skip. So I love that PVC pipe, especially like when doing that hip hurdle mobility, because it's going to keep us in that neutral position. I love that one. I know not everybody has access to PVC pipes. So another way you can do it, if you have the shoulder mobility, you can lock those hands behind the head. That's going to help get us into that position. Or another one I truly like is, back up a little bit. If I'm doing any sort of like A skip, B skip, I can put my arms straight out in front. And now what my arms do is going to tell me what my hips are doing. So if they're not staying straight out in front as I perform an A skip, um, A skip, B skip, whatever, you can do a straight leg run with it. If they're not staying out in front, that means my pelvis is not staying neutral in that movement. So it's a great, like, it gives you feedback right then and there. So I think it's a phenomenal tool to use with it.
And Ben, besides the A skip, B skip, what else are you using? If you could just, because we understand the PVC run, but just explain that to the people that may not be understanding what that is, what you do with the PVC pipe. Obviously, you're extending it overhead, and then what are you having the athlete do?
Yeah, so we could do a number of drills with it. So like I said, I've used it before on like just hurdles for that hip mobility. So it gets them up tall. I've done it with the A skip. So now they're moving, they're staying up tall with it. You can even do it. I haven't done it as much where I'm just having people naturally jog with it, but you could put them into that position. I've mainly used it in like that, in the like skip series, teaching that movement to there.
Gotcha.
Have you guys done it differently from that one?
No, I agree with that. It makes total sense. And I also like that like zombie pose with the arms out in front, because that's a good point. If your hips are rotating forward or whatever, it's going to dictate where your arms are. So that's an easy one that you can
Yeah,
feed back.
and especially for, if you're coaching a group of 25 individuals, it's a very easy one to do.
The arms are straight out, right? And their arms start doing one of these or doing one of these. What does that tell you about their hips?
Yeah, so if I'm here, and then I start to come here, like my arms start to go forward, that'd be that posterior pelvic tilt, right? So then if I come back, I'm looking at that anterior pelvic tilt. But if I'm going through an A skip and my arms are able to stay straight out in front, that's telling me that my pelvis is staying neutral throughout that movement.
Cool. That makes sense.
Yeah. And does that answer your question? All right. That's Andy's internet for the episode. So let me check back on the list. And then some other things we talked about that hip drop. I know we just talked a lot about anterior, posterior pelvic tilt. That hip drop ends up being so huge. So I'll discuss it a little bit on the video we'll watch and some ways you can catch it into the video. But when we look at a hip drop, we look at needing to strengthen those glute meads. So we can look at those lateral band walks, those monster walks. I'm a huge fan of 7-way hips. Truly lights you up. And it's funny because you'll see these guys who are super strong, have never done 7-way hips. And if you're doing 10 reps at each one, you'll see them just punching their hips by the end of it. But those are all phenomenal deals with it. Another one you could look at is a step up with a knee drive, because that gets us stabilizing on that leg. So there's a lot of good movements we can do with that one. So next one we're going to look at is going to be, keep going down the body, we're going to look at the knees. So we really want to make sure that we're avoiding those valgus knees when we start to run. So we want that knee landing on top of that foot and being stable with it. So we don't want it outside. We want to be on top of that foot, and that we're able to track on top of that foot throughout, and that we have that stability in there with the knees. Other ones we can look at there is we can look at TKEs. We can look at single leg RDLs. Absolutely love single leg RDLs for multiple reasons. But we think about, surprised I haven't said it yet in here, but if you look at gait, it is a unilateral movement. So if I start to do single leg RDLs, I'm coming up pulling with my hamstrings. I can keep that knee on top of that foot, go ahead and teaching that pattern to there. Next one, a big one. And when we look at my video, you guys can absolutely roast me on this one later, because this is the worst part of my gait. I think so. I'm sure like some much better runners than me will be like, okay, there's a lot of things you can work on there, but we'll get there. So we look at the feet and the ankles, and I want to talk about the ankles first. So when we have that foot land, that ankle should be able to absorb that force, right? We know from running that running does put a lot of stress on the body, compared to biking, swimming. There is a lot of stress that gets put on the body. And that's why you see a lot of these phenomenal endurance athletes, like they have to have those other modalities, because we are putting a lot of force on those joints with literally every step we're taking into that run. So a big one we'll see is that ankles start to collapse. We want to absorb it, and that ankle stays nice and stiff to it. But you'll so often see that ankle start to collapse. And then over time, that's going to lead, to multiple issues. The body's a kinetic chain. So if I'm starting to have if I can't absorb that force at the ankles, it's going to lead to knee problems. We can look at post-tib issues down in the foot by us not being able to absorb that force. So we want to make sure that ankle is able to absorb that force. And you can see it on the video, especially in my left. My ankle collapses a little bit into there, which is something I need to work on in the video. One of the ways we can look at that is we can strengthen the ankle. We can do it through a lot of ways. I'm sure you guys have worked the pogo series with your athletes before. I think we think about it all the time in athletics and sports where we change direction. I don't think we necessarily think about that pogo series as much when it comes to those mid-distance runs, but we have to be able to strengthen those tendons, those ligaments, to absorb that force, right? But the other one we can look at is teaching that lower limb how to absorb that force, is we start to look at those skater hops. So for anyone who doesn't know exactly what a skater hop is, I'm moving laterally. I don't need, for this drill, what I'm trying to teach on this ankle. I don't need a huge hop all the way out to one side. I just want to push off with my left. I'm going to land on my right. Again, I'm going to look at my knee as well. I want to keep that knee on top of that foot. I don't want valgus. I don't want it going out to the outside of my foot. But then I also want that ankle to learn how to absorb that force as I'm moving to the side with it as well. So there's ones, and those are easy ones you could also throw into a warm up. It doesn't have to be something you program into your main training set. I know we've discussed before on this podcast is, using that warm up to take advantage of, areas we need to address. That's 10 minutes. We look at if you have 60 minutes a day for training sessions. If you have 6 sessions in the week, 10 minutes of warm up, that's an hour worth of training you're getting in to take advantage of areas you need to address. We look at the feet too as well. So talk about the ankle. Let's move on to the feet, where we look at, how we push off. And then one of the ones we'll see, and we'll discuss it in the video, is we look at that pronation, that supination. When you see on my foot, you'll see that my foot will start a little bit on the outside and then roll forward. So I'll strike there. That's what's called that supination with the foot. We'll look at the opposite of that. We'll see a pronation where somebody strikes inside and gets more forward. And we have somebody who just lands completely natural with it right there on the foot. So with the supination you'll see in mine, I'm not necessarily too concerned about the little roll that I have. Where we do get concerned is when it becomes far greater than what you're going to see in this video. So those are the 3 we're looking at with the foot. The next one, the last one in our 10-point checklist, is we are going to look at foot landing. And this one might trigger some people, but that's fine. So foot landing, you immediately hear people talk about heel strike, right? And it's the heel strike is going to be the end of you when it comes to running. I'm sure you guys heard a lot of guys be very upset with the heel strike, right? The heel strike's not necessarily a bad thing. The heel strike becomes a bad thing when we pair that with an overstride. So if we are having a heel strike, but we're landing underneath our body or just slightly in front of our hips, we're going to be fine. But if we start to pair that heel strike with an overstride, that's where we're going to see a whole list of issues. We're going to start to see those. No, there goes Andy. We'll start to see those shin splints, and then everything else that works its way up with the body from those heel strikes. So if you look at the foot or look at where we're striking, we have a heel strike, midfoot strike, which we'll see in the video, and then we have a forefoot strike. The biggest thing we want to make sure, though, is where we're striking is underneath our hips. I referenced earlier about things I'll say during warm-up cues. One of the most common ones I'll always say outside of, hey, look where we're moving, is, hey, striking underneath our hips. And that doesn't matter what drill I'm doing. That doesn't matter if it's an A skip, A march, B skip, straight leg run, dribble series. I am always repeating striking underneath our hips to get individuals used to being able to pull back under there and not start to have that overstride with it. And then another way we can look at it, other than just an individual cueing, hey, striking underneath the hips, we can start to look at movements like a speed skip. So when I look at a speed skip, we see people do these skips where it's a very big knee drive, right? So when I'm looking at a speed skip, I'm worried about getting my feet off the ground as fast as I can. I don't have an excessive knee drive. I cue it as, hey, if I'm skipping over hot coals, I'm punching into the ground, so I'm striking underneath me, and I'm allowing my hips to move me forward. I'm not reaching out with it. So my feet should be striking underneath my hips every single rep, and I'm just focused on getting off the ground as quickly as I can. Not getting off the ground as high as I can, but getting my feet off the ground and striking back underneath me every single rep. So a lot of the things with running, I think you can get so much work in the warm-up if it is done correctly. Like, I've never been huge on teaching running where it works for a lot of people, especially in acceleration. And that's a whole other thing. You can get into the difference between acceleration, sprinting, everything else, what drills you do there. That's a whole other episode. But I've never been a big fan on getting into the wall with the knee drive. I think there's a lot of other drills we can get guys moving to do. I know a lot of guys who've had success with that. I personally have seen better success with some of these other movements. So, guys, that is our 10-point checklist. Before I move on to the videos, Jimmy, Andy, is there anything you want to add to this checklist?
I was just going to say, or I was going to more ask, when do you get to the topic of shoes and how that's affecting the feet?
That's a hot one, right? Um, and so we see it so often of people like, how often do you see Hokas? Like
All
everywhere,
over the
right?
place.
And
Oh, it's either
it's
that or toe shoes.
it's not a bad shoe, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's right for everyone in every situation. When it comes to running and me feeling where I am, I like to have a minimalist shoe with it. I'm not wearing the toe shoes, but I don't want that huge heel that a lot of Hokas have. I saw Squat University, they put something, I'm pretty sure Squat University put it, and they were looking at a lift, but it pertains to running the exact same way. Is he put like a bag of marshmallows underneath his feet and then it was like trying to deadlift? It'd be the same way with running. And I was going to save this one for the video, but we look at people overstriding. A lot of times they don't know they're overstriding. I've seen individuals with that huge heel get out there and not feel that overstride. And then we take the shoes off and then it naturally corrects. So, for one, the way your foot is designed, it will get you to naturally strike underneath. And so your body's going to protect itself. So, that's another one I like to do with individuals who are overstriding. Hey, get on the grass, run barefoot, because that's going to put you into those right positions. So, shoes, I'm personally a fan of Brooks when it comes to running. But again, like I said, I don't consider myself to be one of these advanced runners that you see some of these guys who are competing in all these triathlons. They can give you one of the individuals I work with, he has a different shoe for every single race. He knows exactly like where he's at and miles at each shoe and has it planned for every single thing. If you're a guy who does the 3 lifts a week, 3 runs a week, and maybe you're running for job performance, you're not going out there and competing that in one of these huge events where you're trying to actually go out and win a triathlon. I think something like a Brooks could work well for other individuals. What have you guys seen?
I've heard great things about ultras. Those are, I think, from a wide toe box standpoint, grip, things like that. They have some really good trail runners. I can't really have too much of a hot take on this because I lift in boots and I do most of my stuff in boots. If you've seen my videos, so but yeah, just people I've worked with. Ultras are popular. I'd probably prefer them over most others, but I know everything has people are usually fall into one category or another. So it's really whatever works for you, whatever you prefer. But I'm not a big fan of like having a huge, thick sole on your shoe. But I know there's some people they have their rationale for it, but I'm not gonna get too far in the weeds there. That can be a separate episode almost.
Yeah,
Andy, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so it seems like every few years there becomes a new hot brand of shoe. 10 years ago, it was Asics. 5 years ago, it was Brooks. Now it's Ultras. I can tell you from somebody who has a wide foot, Ultras feel nice to me. I can tell you from if somebody likes to heel strike, but they're not striking out in front of them or striking behind themselves, maybe a Hoka is a good one for them. Um, and then you actually have individuality when it comes to your foot yourself. Like for instance, I broke my fifth metatarsal, and so the widest part of my foot is back towards my ankle, which makes it really difficult to buy a shoe because they're never wide enough. If even if they're really wide, they're still rubbing back at that where that break was. So yeah, there's what's hot and what's not. And I just certainly do think that there are advancements in the shoe technology, but a lot of it just comes down to individuals' feet and what's best for them and their foot strike pattern. Uh, Side note: if you guys ever want to see some messed up feet, Google LeBron James feet, and you will see an athlete who needs to read the book, Fix Your Feet. So all the listeners out
But
there, go look that up.
on the same topic, because I've gotten in discussions with physical therapists and things like that before. If you're not currently dealing with an issue, you don't always have to fix things. So, like LeBron James, you're not going to tell a first ballot Hall of Famer to fix your feet when, God forbid, you fix that his foot, it changes his gait, and all of a sudden he's got low back injuries. He has an Achilles tear or something. So I'm not touching that. If I'm working with LeBron James, just keep doing your thing, man. Keep hopping in the cold tubs, keep doing your recovery, but I'm not touching that. Same argument like Usain Bolt. He probably has tight hamstrings. But guess what? He's the fastest man on earth. So if you make him more flexible in his hamstrings, you may slow him down or you may screw up his gait and he snaps a hamstring. So with all of these things on the checklist, I think it should hit home. Like if you're a guy with a chronic issue and you're looking at your video, you're covering these 10 steps, this video is for you. Even if you don't have an issue, it's still good to go through this checklist, but not necessarily you need to change all of your training because your gait is slightly off. Because if you're doing your job, if you're police, fire, military, you're doing your job successfully, you're injury free. Not to say you can't get injured, but if it is very difficult in my experience to change somebody's running gait, if they've been running like this since they've been first able to walk, it's going to be difficult to change somebody's running gait. That's always been my argument there, because it is tough, because one, most people don't know what they're looking for. So that's why it's important in this video. Two, they don't have a set of eyes to watch them. And then three, they don't even know what training interventions to do to fix it. So it's like, what's the point? Because there's so many things that go into training, and there's only so much time in the week. I want to get faster. I want to get stronger. I want to be more explosive. I got to do my injury prevention. I got to get my sleep. I got to get my nutrition. I got to get my meal prep. There's only so many hours in the week. So for the running, if running is part of your job and you are not meeting your running standard that you have to do, this is a great video for you because you need to get better. If you're a runner and you're constantly injured, well, yeah, this video is also for you, because now you have to film yourself running, take a look, where are your issues, and then again, individualized coaching is the way to go, because it's really tough to diagnose yourself and put it. We're giving you examples, but you really need one-on-one coaching, especially if you have an egregious like running abnormality. But I look forward to Ben's video because we can take a look at that and we can kind of chime in there as well. So I'll hit pause.
Yeah, and a couple of things I want to bring up from there. It's a great point. And, coaches so often can be guilty of over coaching. You brought up Usain Bolt. One of the examples I always bring up is you take Tyreek Hill in the NFL. His arm swing, and this is something I missed in the checklist. I can go back and touch on it. His arm swing goes across his body slightly. Or not necessarily across, but you get so many people like, hey, we have to be, hip to ear, hip to ear, hip to ear. So he comes a little here. If you're coaching somebody that runs that fast, what do you do if you get into the point of, hey, now you're crossing the midline slightly, we need to come over here, now it's just something else from the thing? No, you don't touch that at that point. Like, he's outrunning everybody. No, don't touch that. And it's the same thing where, Jimmy, we talked about it offline before. If you're somebody who's had a career, you're, let's say, 5 mile time, you're passing comfortably, you've been relatively pain free, and you see something, well, like maybe my backside mechanics are slightly long. Do you need to touch that at that point? No. Like, just ever so slightly, you're passing what you need to. You've stayed relatively injury free. There's some things you don't have to adjust. Just because it doesn't necessarily look exactly like somebody else's, which it never will, we don't have to go ahead and just change it just because 3 guys on YouTube said, hey, it should look like this.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. And sometimes it's not always fixing what's wrong. Sometimes as the coach, I'll be watching somebody's gait and I'll know what is most likely tight. So Andy talked about that very like hyperextended runner. I'm not going to use like lordotic. So like their lower back is really arched, well, they probably have tight hip flexors because they're getting pulled into anterior pelvic tilt. So maybe I'm doing more hip mobility with them. Maybe they're doing like the duck walk, and they're even like LeBron James, when he runs, his foot is externally rotated like this, and he's doing his sprints and changing direction. So his IT bands, or anybody who runs like that, your IT bands are probably really tight. So sometimes for me, it's less about fixing it and then just addressing what is most likely tight. So I can tell you 1,000 times out of 1,000, you're going to get somebody who has that type of running mechanics where their foot is externally rotated. You throw them on a foam roller, they're going to be absolutely lit up. And it could tell you right to left difference. So, because I've seen sometimes where they have a normal foot strike on one side and one foot is externally rotated. Well, they have some hip mobility issues. Let's address some soft tissue work. Let's maybe work internal and external rotation of the hip. So it's not always let's fix your running gait, but let's work on some mobility interventions or myofascial release, like foam rolling, things like that. Because that's what I'm using. Because it's it's an informal assessment, just watching somebody's running gait. So that's how I kind of come across with running form. It's not always, hey, we're going to fix this after 20 to 30 years of you running. It's more so, hey, what can I do to help you so you stay injury free and things like that? Because you've developed these immobilities and things like that. So that's my approach with it.
Yep, absolutely. You guys ready to look into these videos and go through the checklist on it?
Yeah, let's look at it.
So for a reminder for everybody at home, we look at the 10-point checklist. We're going to look at overall movement pattern, overall symmetry. Where's our head? Where's our eyes looking at? Shoulders, arms. We start to look at our core. We look at the hips, knees, and then we look at feet, ankles, and then overall foot landing. And the one last thing I want to bring up before getting into the video, like I said, I missed it a little bit earlier when we started talking about those arms, started talking about hand placement a lot, is those arms, big thing we want to look at is they're not starting to rotate across that body. That ends up being a wasted movement. So we want to be relatively in line with those arms to there. So let's go ahead and look at it. I filmed a frontal and sagittal plane view. Both are going to be in slow-mo so we can actually look to see what's happening. We're going to start with this slow-mo on the frontal plane. So click over to here. All right, you guys have it seen? All right, so if we look on here, we start to see as I come closer into this camera, overall, I'm up tall. I like it. We start to see good knee drive. The biggest thing I do not like in this video, I'm going to rewind slightly and you can see a little bit earlier or a little bit on the backside, is like I said, when I'm landing, especially right here, you can start to see that ankle collapse in. Now, that is something I definitely want to fix. Like I said, I can look at, working those tendons, those ligaments into the ankle. I can work on those skater hops, like I said earlier, doing a better job absorbing those forces. That is not something I want to keep prolonged of just allowing that ankle to collapse. You can start, like I said, there's a list of issues that can come with it. And we look at the posterior tib giving you issues and then just working up that kinetic chain. So here on this back side, I really like, you can see that ankle collapse again. So I don't want to hammer that one too much. I'm going to try to pause a little bit here.
Nice Baywatch video, by the way. This is nice slow-mo video. Love it. The Baywatch jog.
Absolutely.
Where's CJ?
All right, let's see if I can get it to pause where I need it to. So it's a little difficult on here on Riverside, getting where I need to the exact frame. But what I want to see is right here. So there's a couple things. My foot's a little bit out. I think that's going to be more so of me trying to get back in line with the camera. But what I really like here is we'll see a lot of times when people start to run, you don't see that whole foot. So we want to make sure we're seeing that whole foot, very similar to how it is here. And then we want that toe pointed down. You feel in the backside mechanics, a lot of individuals who are getting hurt while running, we won't see that foot. So that's a very easy one for us to see.
And real quick, sorry to interrupt, Ben, because the other thing I'm looking for at this angle too, in this video, we can see his right knee flexion. So basically how much his knee is bent. A lot of times if you're coming off a knee injury, you'll have more knee flexion in your non-affected leg, so your healthier leg, than your affected leg. So that's one of the things I look for, is the backside mechanics. So as somebody's running away from me, is their right knee bending the same as their left knee? Usually if they're coming off a knee injury, that's one of the last things to get back, is really that knee flexion, range of motion there. So I'd be interested on this next slide, or the next stride, I should say.
Yeah, let's see what the left one looks like.
So let it keep going. Yeah, you look pretty symmetrical there, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I'm pretty okay with that. And then the other thing I want to talk about is, we talked about that foot landing where I'm looking at. So you see, if I go to the outside and then roll in slightly.
Yeah.
I don't want it any more excessive than what it is there. I'm okay with that one. But I don't want anything more with it.
And when you say it's collapsing in, you're just saying that once you pronate and then supinate, that your ankle isn't going past neutral. The medial side of your ankle isn't going past neutral. Is that what you're saying?
So what I don't like is my ankle collapsing in on it. I'm not necessarily looking at the foot. I'm looking at that ankle.
See that shift in his ankle?
Yeah.
See how, because I'm looking at the same thing. I'm looking at the ankle. You can see when he makes the foot strike, the ankle is going into, it's rolling over. So as he's planting,
I can see that. I guess what I'm talking about, we're talking at foot strike, right?
Yes.
Yeah, where it's rolling just past neutral, because everybody is going to have to roll a little bit if you go into supination or pronation into supination. So it's the excessive roll when it goes past the anatomical
that's
position.
Excessive collapse of the ankle is what we want to avoid. And so mine can definitely be worked on there. And then the other one I want to talk about is, it doesn't work well for this video that I primarily wear only black, but we talked about that hip drop. So I would be looking at, when I'm landing, am I getting those hips imbalanced where I'm having that drop, just like the name implies? A way we can look at this in our videos, like I said, doesn't help that I primarily wear only black, is I could wear a different color shirt, different color shorts, and then I could tuck my shirt in to where I can now look at that waistband. Is that waistband staying level throughout, or am I starting to see it dip as I start to land? If you didn't have different color clothing to wear there, you could also get like some bright pink duct tape put around your waistband. So that would allow us to see, similar to how, like, when I was at Troy, we were in Adidas school. So it was easy to see if somebody was hitting depth on a squat without looking overly hard, because what are those three stripes doing? Are they getting down there, or are they staying above the knee? So you can look at it from that way, but that is something you definitely want to look at, is what do those hips do when you're landing? But overall, again, I would consider myself a very novice runner compared to most people who actually go out and compete in these long-term endurance events. The biggest thing I would want to see is taking away some of that collapse of my ankle on those strides. So that's definitely something I do not want to do over a prolonged time. Cool. So let's look at slow-mo from sagittal plane. We're going to come here. And the big thing I want you guys to look at is, where am I landing on my foot? And then where is my foot looking in relation to the rest of my body? So if I come here, I'm going, let me hit play right here. Boom. So you see I'm a midfoot striker, and then notice it's pretty close to underneath me. So once we get there, so I wish I could draw on this app, because one of the things we'll do is we'll take from your head down and draw a line, and we'll try and see how close that foot is to there. So often we'll see people who think they're striking underneath, but they're actually way out in front. So I'm pretty okay with where this strike is. Where I would not be okay is if it's further out there, and now I'm starting to hit with my heel first. So overall, I'm pretty okay with what that looks like to there. What do you guys think?
I was going to say, you ideally want that foot to just be slightly in front of center of mass, right? Not
Correct.
Completely underneath. Right.
Correct.
And then I don't know if you mentioned this, but did you explain the difference between heel, mid, and forefoot striking?
No, I did not. So we look at that
Okay.
heel strike. The heel strike is going to be the back of that foot. You'll see that midfoot strike is what you see, not necessarily on this frame that's paused because that's now me starting to push off. But you'll see that midfoot is, oh, you see as I'm starting to hit more of that midfoot to there. And that forefoot would be more so like the balls of your feet to there with it.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, it's a good
And
point to bring up, Andy.
I was gonna
Um,
say, oh, go ahead.
no, you can go ahead.
I just was gonna say there's a big debate out there that a lot of the reasons why we heel strike to begin with is because we're wearing shoes, and if we didn't have shoes, all of us would either be mid to forefoot strikers. And because our when we run, our foot naturally strikes just ahead of our center of mass. If you heel strike, that's sending reverberations right up your kinetic chain from your ankle, knee, and hip. And some people will argue that, it's providing unnecessary wear and tear to your body over time. Hence hence why, minimalist shoes are really popular. Because if you have a minimalist shoe, you could be the biggest heel striker in the world. You go from a pair of Hokas to a pair of minimalist shoes, and now all of a sudden you are running on the balls of your feet. So, um, fun debate if you guys want to go down that rabbit trail. Jimmy?
Um, so yeah, Jimmy, was there anything you wanted to add onto that video?
No, I thought it
Need the
looked
video.
I thought it looked pretty solid. Like, yeah, obviously from that angle, you're not going to be able to see the pronation, supination, but that's not what we're looking for. I'm looking for the knee flexion again. I was looking at your torso angle, your arm action, things like that. But no, like egregious differences there. So
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, I was
So
supposed to be looking at the video too, and I didn't see anything either. My bad, Ben.
no, you're good. So yeah, those are two very easy videos that someone can go out and you take this checklist, you take those videos. I recommend doing it in slow-mo. You can film one regular speed, just kind of like I said earlier, just take the overall, like how does the movement pattern look? But get that slow-mo in there. It's easier too when I'm doing it on my phone and I can kind of get more frames into it. Like you saw earlier, I was struggling to get exactly where I wanted to on that foot. It's easier to kind of look at it on that phone too, where you can control it by the frames. But make sure you get that front and then make sure you get that side view. Another one we can look at that I tend to have an issue with, just from my background, is I tend to be a little bit too springy for like mid distance running. A lot of, hey, putting that force into the ground, ACFs where I'm driving it into the ground, all that. Like I end up getting a little too much into it. And it's very common with, we'll see it from a lot of individuals who grew up playing, football, baseball, basketball, things like that. But we want to try and keep that head fairly level on there. It works well. My idea is I was trying to have that fence there to see if I could see my head compared to the fence. It just wasn't tall enough. But if you have a wall that changes colors, you can look at what that head's doing to there. Some of the things that may affect that is the surface you're on. So if you're on a softer surface, you may see more of a bounce as opposed to, we were on track, concrete, whatever else. So those are some other good things you can look at into the videos. So guys, is there anything else you want to add on this video, on either one of those videos or any part of the 10-point checklist?
Well, I just adding on to that last thing you said, to me, that's usually the biggest giveaway of whether somebody is an experienced long distance runner or not is you look at somebody who's really been running long distance for a while and you're like, wow, their running pattern, their gait, it looks so smooth, natural, and effortless. And usually if you look at that head and you look at the vertical displacement, it's like they're gliding across the earth and not like bouncing up and down like you said. So to me, that's always when I look at is how much are they springing up and down as they run.
Yeah, absolutely. So guys, that's our episode for this week. One of the big things I want you to take away is, we talked about this checkpoint, 10-point checklist to, improve longevity with running. Nothing is an absolute. So you can still have every single one of these things correct, But if we don't do other things correct, we don't sleep, we don't hydrate, and there are going to be free accidents. We can't say just because we did every single one of these that we're not going to get injured. Risks happen in life. The point of this is to help mitigate that injury risk for you so you can better improve, whatever it is that you're training for. So guys, if you are interested in training with us, make sure to check out the links in the description. If you guys liked the episode or have any questions on the episode, also make sure to drop those in the comments. We'll see you guys back here next week.